The blizzard tore across Montana's frozen cliffs when a young police officer was ambushed and thrown over the edge. Could she survive? And who would do such a thing? In that raging storm, a Navy SEAL named Ethan Cole and his loyal German shepherd Rex heard her desperate cry for help. He saved her, but the rescue quickly became a fight for survival. The men who left her to die are now hunting them, and their only refuge, a lonely wooden cabin buried in the snow, is no longer safe. Sometimes the miracles God sends don't come with wings. They come with courage, scars, and the heart of a soldier. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe faith still saves lives, subscribe for more stories of courage, loyalty, and divine miracles. Winter had swallowed the Montana mountains whole. Snow fell in thick, relentless veils, and the wind howled through the pine valleys like a chorus of ghosts. Beneath that blinding white silence, the world felt both infinite and suffocating, a place where secrets could freeze and stay buried forever. Ethan Cole moved through that storm as if he belonged to it. At 36, he was the kind of man who carried war in his posture, straight-backed, steady, but heavy, as though some part of him still stood on foreign soil. His jaw was cut sharp beneath a dark beard, his gray eyes unreadable and cold as the snow itself. A Navy SEAL on special assignment, Ethan had been sent to Snowpine under the guise of a wilderness patrol, but his true mission was darker, to trace whispers of a smuggling route threading through these mountains. Weapons, drugs, and something even worse, hidden beneath the snow like veins of rot under ice. At his side trotted Rex, a 6-year-old German shepherd whose sable coat shimmered in the muted light. Broad-chested, alert, and scarred slightly above his left eye, a reminder of a mission gone wrong, Rex was not just a partner, but a reflection of his handler, disciplined, loyal, and haunted. The two had served together in Syria, where one blast had nearly killed them both. Since then, Ethan had learned to trust the dog's instincts more than any human's word. The storm bit harder as they climbed higher into the pass. The snow hissed beneath their boots, and visibility fell to almost nothing. Ethan raised a gloved hand, signaling Rex to halt. That's when he heard it, faint, buried beneath the wind, a sound that didn't belong to nature, a voice, a human cry, thin and breaking. "Help! Somebody, please!" The sound drifted between gusts like the echo of a ghost. Rex's ears perked. The dog stiffened, nose to the wind, then barked once, sharp, certain. "Show me," Ethan muttered. Rex lunged forward, cutting through the snowdrift. Ethan followed, his breath coming out in clouds of frost, adrenaline sharpening every sense. They crossed a ridge and stopped near the edge of a steep cliff that dropped into a ravine choked with ice and broken trees. At first, there was nothing, only the storm. Then, through the blur of snow, he saw movement. A figure clung to a thin branch jutting out from the cliffside. A woman, her uniform dark blue against the white abyss. Her fingers, bare and bloodied, were locked around the branch as her boots slipped against the frozen rock. One wrong move, and she would vanish into the void. "Hang on!" Ethan shouted, his voice nearly swallowed by the wind. The woman turned her head weakly, eyes wide and glassy with pain. She looked no older than 30. Strands of auburn hair stuck to her pale face, her skin ghostly under the frost. "Please," she gasped. He anchored his rope around a pine trunk and lowered himself toward her. The wind clawed at him, tearing at his jacket. He could see the exhaustion in her arms, the tremor in her grip. She was seconds away from falling. "Don't look down," he said calmly. "Focus on me." Her voice cracked. "I can't. My shoulder." He reached her just as the branch groaned. One of her hands slipped. For a fraction of a second, she hung suspended in the void, and then his gloved hand caught her wrist. The force nearly pulled him off balance, but he anchored his legs and pulled. With one final surge, she was over the ledge, collapsing against his chest. She trembled uncontrollably, whispering something in an incoherent. Up close, Ethan saw the police insignia on her sleeve, Anchorage Police Department, though they were hundreds of miles from Alaska. Her badge identified her as Officer Sarah Hunt. "Sarah," he said, testing the name. She was light in his arms, fragile in a way that contradicted the grit in her eyes. Her face bore scratches, and a cut on her temple had frozen into a dark streak down her cheek. He could see the outline of bruises forming beneath her collar, the kind that didn't come from falling. I was attacked," she stammered, voice trembling. She winced, clutching her side. "There were two of them. They knew my route. I think someone from inside—" "Save it," Ethan said gently. "We'll talk later." He lifted her easily and carried her toward the road, Rex trotting close beside, ears twitching at every sound. Snow caked their boots. The world had narrowed to white silence again. At the base of the trail, Ethan found his Jeep buried under a thin layer of frost. He laid Sarah across the back seat, covering her with his jacket. Her lips were blue, her breathing shallow. "Stay with me," he muttered, turning the heater on full blast. Her eyes fluttered. "You're not from here, are you?" "No," he said, focusing on the road ahead, "but trouble has a way of finding me." She tried to smile but couldn't. "I was investigating something people in uniform, shipments through the forest road. I think they knew." Ethan's grip tightened on the wheel. The pieces were aligning too well. His mission, her story, the hidden routes through snow pine. Someone was using the department to move contraband, and this woman had gotten too close. By the time they reached Snow Pine General Hospital, Sarah had lost consciousness. Ethan carried her inside, boots echoing on the tile floor, his breath steaming in the sterile light. Doctors rushed forward, nurses shouting orders. One of them asked who he was. "A hiker," he said simply. "Found her on the ridge." He didn't wait for questions. Outside, the snow had begun to ease, replaced by a pale silver fog. The silence after the storm was unnerving. Rex sat beside him, staring toward the tree line. The dog's ears flicked, tail low. "What is it?" Ethan asked softly. Rex growled, low, almost imperceptible. Ethan followed his gaze. Far beyond the hospital parking lot, where the forest met the road, a dark figure stood, still as a shadow, a man in a black winter coat and gloves, face hidden beneath a hood. Even from that distance, Ethan could feel the weight of his stare. The man turned, walked back into the trees, and vanished. Ethan's pulse quickened. Whoever had pushed Sarah off that cliff had just watched him save her, and now he knew exactly who to follow. The storm had finally broken over Snow Pine, but the aftermath left the mountains eerily still, the kind of silence that carried weight, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Inside the hospital, fluorescent lights hummed above the sterile hallway where Ethan Cole stood, his coat still damp with melted snow. Through the glass window, he watched the doctors move around the woman he had rescued, Officer Sarah Hunt, still unconscious, hooked up to tubes and monitors. She looked smaller beneath the white sheets, fragile, her auburn hair matted against the pillow, her skin pale from blood loss. Yet even in stillness, she carried an air of defiance, the quiet strength of someone who refused to die easily. Ethan's fingers drummed against his thigh as he stared. He had seen many kinds of wounds, some inflicted by war, others by betrayal. Hers carried both. He didn't know who had done this to her, but he knew the look of an orchestrated silence when he saw one. The police officers outside her room, 2 men in Navy uniforms, were too calm, their eyes too blank. Guards, yes, but also watchers. Rex sat beside him, his head resting on his paws, tail motionless. The dog's gaze never left the corridor. Every few seconds his ears flicked toward the sound of footsteps or distant conversation, muscles tightening beneath his thick fur. He didn't trust this place. Neither did Ethan. A door opened. A nurse approached, a middle-aged woman with short gray hair and a pinched expression. Her name tag read, Nurse Bailey. Her voice was low but firm. "You can't stay here, sir. Visiting hours are over." Ethan offered a polite nod, his voice calm. "I'll go soon. Just making sure she pulls through." "She's lucky," Bailey said, her tone softening. "Whoever found her saved her life. But she lost a lot of blood. She'll need rest and protection." She hesitated, as if about to say something more, then glanced toward the officers and walked away. The words settled like frost in Ethan's chest. Protection? From whom? He turned and left the hospital, Rex padding silently beside him. Outside, the night was sharp and cold. The moon hung low over the frozen valley, its light reflecting off the drifts of snow like shards of broken glass. The world seemed too quiet, too clean. Ethan's instincts were restless. He replayed the moment on the cliff, the way Sarah had said, "They knew my route." Someone inside her department had set her up, and whoever they were, they had already started cleaning their tracks. He drove back toward the site of the attack, his Jeep crunching over the icy road. Rex sat upright in the passenger seat, nose pressed to the cracked window, breathing slow and alert. The wind had died, leaving behind a blanket of untouched snow. But Ethan knew how to read the land like a story. There were patterns and chaos. When he reached the ridge where he'd pulled Sarah from the cliff, the snow was already disturbed by other boots, bigger, newer prints layered over his own. Too many. Someone had been here since he left. The crash site was gone. No broken branches, no blood, no debris. Even the scorch marks from the rescue flares were buried. Someone had scrubbed the scene clean. Ethan crouched, scooping up a handful of snow. Beneath it, something dark glinted faintly. A half-smoked cigarette, crushed and frozen into the ice. He picked it up carefully with gloved fingers. On the filter, a small stain of dried red. Blood. Rex whined low, then stiffened, turning his head toward the east slope. He began to sniff the air, his nose twitching rapidly before trotting off through the snow. "Easy," Ethan murmured, following. The dog led him along a narrow trail between the pines. The faint smell of smoke carried on the breeze. The trail ended at an old structure, a flour mill, its sign faded and rusted, its windows boarded up. The building looked long abandoned, yet a thin column of smoke curled from a pipe near the roof. Ethan drew closer, keeping to the shadows. Rex crouched beside him, silent. Through a cracked wooden slat, Ethan saw 2 figures inside. One was tall and thick-shouldered, his head shaved, a serpent tattoo winding up his neck. The other wore a parka with the unmistakable Anchorage police insignia on the sleeve. A cop. Their voices were muffled but clear enough. "Should have finished the job," the tattooed man growled. "If she's still breathing, we're all screwed." "She won't talk," the officer replied. He was younger, maybe in his late 30s, with a nervous energy that betrayed guilt. "The fall should have killed her. Even if she wakes up, she won't remember." The other laughed. "You sure about that?" A pause. "The lieutenant said to handle it clean. No mess, no attention." Ethan's pulse thudded once, steady and cold. Lieutenant. That name again. He didn't know who the man was yet, but he was no ordinary cop, a dirty network inside law enforcement, the perfect cover for a smuggling ring. He pulled back quietly, eyes narrowing. This was confirmation. But before he could move farther, Rex's head snapped up. The dog emitted a warning growl, deep and low. A crunch of footsteps echoed behind them. Ethan turned sharply, catching sight of a flashlight beam slicing through the trees. Someone else was patrolling. He grabbed Rex's collar and slipped back into the forest. The beam swept over the snow where he had been crouching seconds earlier. Voices followed. "Hey, did you hear that?" Ethan and Rex moved silently, the shadows their ally. When they finally reached the jeep again, he exhaled slowly, scanning the tree line. Whoever was behind this had people everywhere. Back in town, the lights of Snow Pine flickered faintly through the storm haze. Ethan parked a few blocks away from the hospital, watching from the dark. Through the third-floor window, he saw movement. Sarah's room. 2 officers still stood guard. But something else caught his eye. A man in a brown coat stood near the entrance, speaking quietly to one of the guards. He looked older, clean-cut, with gray hair slicked neatly to the side and a faint, calculating smile. The kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. When the man turned toward the parking lot, the overhead light hit his face, and Ethan saw the rank pins on his collar. Lieutenant Mark Danner, the man from the mill, the one giving orders. Ethan sank lower in his seat, Rex watching intently. Danner lit a cigarette, the same brand as the one Ethan had found, and took a slow drag. He looked toward the upper window where Sarah lay and smirked, then walked to his car and drove off into the night. Ethan felt the cold settle deeper in his bones. The storm outside might have ended, but the real one had just begun. The moon hung pale and distant above the Montana Valley as Ethan Cole guided his Jeep down the icy road, headlights slicing through a curtain of snow. The hospital's glow had faded behind him, replaced by the solemn quiet of the wilderness. In the passenger seat, Rex watched the darkness beyond the glass, his amber eyes steady, his breath fogging the cold window. In the back seat lay Sarah Hunt, still weak, bundled in Ethan's coat, her breathing shallow but stable. Her auburn hair caught faint light from the dashboard, strands clinging to her pale cheeks. Ethan's hand tightened on the steering wheel. He had seen fear before, but the kind that clung to Sarah wasn't simple fear. It was knowledge, the kind that could kill you for knowing. He drove north toward the foothills, away from Snow Pine's lights, until the narrow trail ended at a clearing surrounded by fir trees heavy with snow. In the middle stood a wooden cabin, dark and unmarked. It was one of several off-grid safe houses left over from Ethan's SEAL operations, built for silence, for vanishing. He carried Sarah inside, careful not to wake her. The cabin was small but solid, a stone fireplace, a single bed, a table scarred by years of use. Rex settled by the door, his thick coat steaming slightly in the warmth. Hours later, Sarah stirred. Her eyes blinked open, green flecked with gray, wary but focused. "Where am I?" she whispered, voice hoarse. Ethan crouched beside her. "Safe. For now." She tried to sit up, wincing as her side protested. "I remember someone grabbed me from behind. I was on a mountain road. Then the fall." Her hand went to her temple, feeling the bandage. "How long?" "6 hours since I pulled you out." Her gaze flicked around the cabin, the rough-hewn walls, the shadow of Rex resting near the fire. "You're not a cop." "No." He paused, then added quietly, "I'm Navy, or I was." Something in her expression shifted. Respect, maybe, or the recognition of someone who'd seen darkness too. "You shouldn't have come back," she murmured. "If they know you helped me, they'll come for you too." "They already are," he said. "I saw your lieutenant, Mark Danner, at the hospital. He's the one who gave the order, isn't he?" Sarah froze, color draining from her face. "You saw him?" Ethan nodded. "Smoking outside, talking to your guards like he owned the place." Her breath trembled. "He does own it. The department, the evidence rooms, the people. He's got everyone either on payroll or under threat." Ethan leaned back on his heels. "Then tell me everything. Start from the beginning." For a long moment she stared into the fire, her expression fractured between exhaustion and fury. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but sharp, every word carrying weight. "I joined the Anchorage police when I was 24, fresh out of academy, full of ideals. I believed in service, in justice, all those things they make you repeat during training. Danner was my first supervisor. Back then he was charming. The kind of man who remembered your birthday, who'd stay late to help with reports. I thought he was the good one." She paused, swallowing. 2 years ago, we started getting shipments, confiscated narcotics for destruction, except the quantities never matched the paperwork. Some went missing between stations. No one questioned it. Then one night, I was assigned to a transfer escort. We were moving evidence crates through the north route. But when we stopped for inspection, one of the vans was gone. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "And Danner?" "He said it was a glitch. But later that night, I followed the GPS tracker from the missing van. It led to an abandoned hangar near Whitehorn Ridge. Inside, there were men loading crates onto a private aircraft. No badges, no records. I recognized 2 of them. APD officers." Her voice hardened. "That's when I realized Danner wasn't cleaning up the city. He was cleaning up competition." Ethan studied her. There was strength in the way she spoke, the measured calm of someone who'd already accepted the cost of truth. "You got proof?" Sarah nodded faintly. "A USB drive with export manifests, serials, payment trails, everything." I was on my way to internal affairs when Danner called, said he wanted to talk. He told me he was proud of me, that he'd been testing my loyalty. I believed him until I saw his partner step out of the shadows with a gun. Ethan's jaw clenched. "That's when they tried to kill you." Her eyes flicked toward him. "And failed, thanks to you." For a moment, silence stretched between them. The fire popped, sparks rising. Outside, the wind shifted through the trees. Ethan reached into his pack, pulling out the blood-stained cigarette he'd found. "One of your men left this at the scene, same brand Danner was smoking." Sarah's gaze darkened. "Then he's getting careless." "Or confident," Ethan said. She lay back, staring at the ceiling. "He won't stop. He can't. If that evidence surfaces, he goes down with half the department. They'll send people, mercenaries, not cops, and they'll come here. Let them." Ethan said quietly. "I've dealt with worse." Her lips curved into a faint, tired smile. "You sound like someone who's already lost too much." He didn't answer, just threw another log into the fire. The truth was, he had. The war had taken his brothers, his peace, his belief in heroes. Maybe saving her was a way of finding something left worth believing in. Rex stirred, lifting his head, ears pricking. His growl rumbled low and deep. Ethan froze, eyes narrowing. The dog rose, pacing toward the door, nose pressed to the crack beneath. "What is it?" Sarah whispered, voice tightening. Ethan moved to the window and peered out. Snow still drifted softly, but in the distance, between the trees, faint pinpricks of light flickered, headlamps moving through the dark, slow and deliberate, not hikers, not rescue. He turned back to her. "You were right." Sarah pushed herself up despite the pain, fear flashing in her eyes. "They found us?" He nodded once, already grabbing his rifle. "Get dressed. We're not staying here." Outside, the sound of engines grew closer, muffled but steady. The forest that had sheltered them now seemed alive with movement. Ethan's mind sharpened to a soldier's clarity. No hesitation, no noise. He slung his rifle over his shoulder, opened the trapdoor beneath the rug, a narrow passage leading to an old storm cellar. "Down there," he ordered. Sarah hesitated, staring into the darkness below. "What about you?" "I'll buy us time." She met his gaze for one long heartbeat, her eyes full of dread and gratitude, then descended with Rex following close behind. The hatch closed just as a distant spotlight swept across the cabin's walls. Ethan stepped back into the dim glow of the fire, his expression turning to steel. The first knock came seconds later, 3 hard raps against the door, then a voice, low and smooth, carrying through the storm. "Evening, Cole. Long way from your Navy days, isn't it?" Ethan froze. He knew that voice. Lieutenant Danner, and he wasn't alone. Snow fell again over the cabin, soft and deceptively peaceful, as if the storm itself was holding its breath for what came next. Inside, Ethan Cole stood motionless near the door, rifle at the ready, every nerve alive. The voice outside, smooth, calm, and venomous, echoed through the wooden walls. "Evening, Cole. Long way from your Navy days, isn't it?" It was Lieutenant Mark Danner, his tone almost casual, as if he were greeting an old friend instead of surrounding him with armed men. Ethan didn't answer. He glanced toward the trap door, making sure it was sealed tight. Beneath it, Sarah Hunt and Rex waited in the dark cellar, breathing in silence. "Open the door, son," Danner called again, his voice tightening. "Let's have a conversation. You've got something of mine. And someone." Ethan's expression hardened. He could see their silhouettes through the frosted window, at least 4 men, maybe 5, shapes blurred by snow, but weapons unmistakable. These weren't cops on duty. They moved with precision, their shadows sweeping the snow like hunters closing in on wounded prey. He counted 3 seconds, then stepped back from the door. "Rex," he whispered. The dog's ears twitched beneath the floorboards. Ethan pulled a smoke grenade from his vest, a remnant from a time when his missions were sanctioned and his enemies wore different uniforms. He pulled the pin, cracked the door open an inch, and rolled it into the storm. The night erupted in a hiss of white fog. Gunfire shredded the silence, sharp bursts, bullets punching through the wood. Ethan hit the floor, rolling behind the stone fireplace. Splinters rained down like snow. He returned fire in measured bursts, controlled, precise. A shadow dropped outside, 1 man down. But there were more. Outside, Danner's voice barked orders. "Flank him! No survivors!" Through the chaos, Ethan heard something break. The rear window. Two men had circled behind. He turned, fired twice, the first shot grazing one attacker's shoulder, the second taking the other in the leg. The wounded man screamed, clutching his thigh. Ethan rushed forward, slamming the rifle stock into his jaw before the man could raise his weapon. He fell limp into the snowdrift just beyond the wall. The battle inside lasted minutes, but felt endless. Smoke thickened, visibility dropped. The smell of gunpowder mixed with pine and burning wood. Ethan's shoulder burned, a graze, nothing fatal. But he was running out of ammo. "Cole!" Danner's voice cut through the fog. "You think you can protect her? You have no idea what you're dealing with." Ethan crouched behind the counter, reloading. "You're right," he muttered to himself. "I don't deal. I end." A crash sounded from the back of the cabin. A flashbang grenade rolled across the floor, its light swallowing the darkness. Ethan dove aside, but the explosion deafened him, a high-pitched whine filling his ears. When his vision cleared, Danner was standing in the doorway, flanked by two men. He looked different up close, tall, broad-shouldered, his once pristine uniform replaced by a tactical coat and black gloves. His silver hair was slicked back, face clean-shaven but cold, the kind of face built to command, and corrupt. "You should have stayed in the desert, soldier," Danner said, his pistol aimed dead center. "This isn't your war." Ethan steadied his breath. "Every war starts the same way. Someone like you decides other people's lives are currency." Danner smirked. "You don't understand the game." "Maybe not," Ethan said, eyes narrowing, "but I know how to end one." Before Danner could respond, a low growl rumbled from beneath the floorboards. Deep, primal. Then the trapdoor burst open. Rex lunged from the dark like a bolt of muscle and fury, knocking one of Danner's men off his feet. The gun went off, ricocheting across the wall. Chaos ignited again. Ethan moved fast, disarming the other guard with a clean strike. The man hit the floor, unconscious. Danner fired once, the bullet grazing Ethan's ribs. Pain seared, but adrenaline kept him upright. Sarah climbed out of the cellar, pale and trembling, but determined, holding Ethan's backup Glock in both hands. Her voice shook, but didn't falter. "Drop it, Mark." Danner turned toward her, lowering his gun slightly, amusement in his eyes. "Sarah, I taught you better than that." "Yeah," she said coldly. "You taught me how to spot a liar." For a moment, three of them stood frozen. Predator, survivor, soldier. Then Danner smiled and threw a flash of movement, grabbing the burning lamp from the table and hurling it toward the wall. Flames leapt up instantly, licking across the dry wood. The cabin began to burn. Ethan grabbed Sarah's arm. "Go!" he shouted. Rex barked sharply, circling to herd them toward the back door. Behind them, Danner fired again, but the shot went wild through the smoke. Ethan kicked the rear door open, snow and cold air crashing in as the fire roared behind them. They ran into the forest, the night filled with gunfire and the crackle of collapsing timber. Branches whipped against their faces as they fled down the slope. The snow muffled their footsteps, but not their breathing. Ethan's lungs burned, his ribs throbbing. Sarah stumbled once, Ethan catching her before she fell. "Keep moving," he urged. "We're not far from the creek." Behind them, explosions echoed, the ammunition in the cabin igniting. The mountain lit up in orange light, flickering like a dying heart. By the time they reached the frozen creek, dawn was bleeding faint pink across the horizon. Sarah collapsed onto the snow, gasping, her face pale but eyes fierce. Rex stood over her protectively, ears pinned back, scanning the tree line. Ethan crouched beside her, checking the wound on her arm. A graze, nothing serious. "He won't stop," she whispered. "He'll burn the whole state to find us." Ethan looked toward the distant smoke rising from what was left of the cabin. "Then we find him first." She met his gaze, saw the quiet fury there, not vengeance, but purpose. The soldier's purpose. The sound of a helicopter cut through the wind, faint, but growing louder. Ethan's eyes narrowed. He turned toward the sound, shielding his eyes from the morning glare. A dark shape moved across the clouds, black and fast, heading toward them. Rex barked once, tail stiff. Sarah's face drained of color. "That's not rescue." Ethan raised his rifle, watching the aircraft drop lower over the ridge. Painted faintly across its side was a seal, the Anchorage police insignia, repurposed on a gunmetal gray helicopter. Danner wasn't done hunting. The wind over the Montana peaks had turned razor-sharp by the time Ethan Cole, Sarah Hunt, and Rex descended toward the small frozen valley below. Behind them, the sky still glowed faintly with the smoke of their burned cabin, a column of gray rising into the dawn like a grave marker. They had been walking for hours, keeping to the tree line, avoiding open ground. The snow creaked beneath their boots, and the air was heavy with the scent of pine and gunpowder. Sarah's lips were pale, her breath visible in the cold, but her eyes, those determined green-gray eyes, refused to dim. Ethan had seen soldiers break under less, but she was built of quiet steel. "We can't keep running," she said, her voice strained but steady. "We need proof. The USB, the documents, they're still in my house." Ethan glanced at her, his jaw tightening. His dark beard was crusted with frost, his gray eyes calculating the risk. "Danner will expect that. He'll have people watching every inch of that property." "Then we don't go through the front," Sarah replied. "There's an old access tunnel under the shed. I used it to move confiscated canine training supplies. If we move at night, we can get in unseen." Ethan looked toward Rex, who had stopped and was staring upwind, ears forward. "He's got a point," Ethan muttered. "The wind's shifting. If we go now, we'll have cover." Sarah nodded. She adjusted her torn parka, her movement stiff but sure. The bruise along her jaw had deepened to a dark violet, yet it did nothing to diminish the quiet authority in her posture. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a cop reclaiming her ground. By dusk, they reached the outskirts of Snow Pine, a town now under Danner's shadow. Patrol vehicles rolled quietly along the streets, their blue lights dimmed. The people who once trusted the police now avoided their gaze. From their vantage point on a hill, Ethan could see Sarah's house, a 2-story cabin-style home with a wraparound porch and a detached shed, both half buried in snow. A patrol car sat idling outside, 2 figures inside, silhouettes against the dashboard glow. Ethan lifted his binoculars. The first was a uniformed officer, bulky under his winter gear, chewing gum with the kind of casual arrogance that came from feeling untouchable. The other man wasn't in uniform. He wore a long wool coat and a black scarf, his face lean, eyes sharp like a blade's edge. His name was Detective Aaron Voss, Danner's second in command, the one who handled the dirty work. Voss was around 40, clean-shaven, his cheekbones cutting under cold skin. A former Marine dishonorably discharged for disciplinary reasons. It was said he enjoyed his job too much. Sarah's voice broke the silence. "He's the one who brought me coffee every morning at the station. He smiled, asked about my mother. I thought he was kind." Ethan handed her the binoculars. Monsters usually are. They waited until night fell completely, the wind picking up again and the patrols thinning out. Ethan studied the terrain. The steep slope behind the house led to the old storage shed. "We move through the creek bed," he whispered. "Stay low, stay quiet. Rex leads." Rex's dark form moved ahead, low and silent, his paws making barely a sound on the snow. The dog's thick coat blended with the night, only his breath visible in small bursts of white. Ethan followed, his rifle slung tight, eyes scanning the windows. Sarah crawled behind him, clutching a flashlight wrapped in cloth to dim its beam. They reached the shed. The wooden door was frozen shut. Ethan drew his knife, wedging it between the hinges until they gave with a muted groan. Inside, dust and frost clung to everything. The air smelled faintly of oil and old hay. Sarah knelt, brushing aside a tarp, revealing a metal grate half buried in snow. "Here," she whispered. Together they lifted it, uncovering a narrow tunnel descending into the dark. Ethan went first, dropping into the cold air below. His boots hit concrete. The passage was narrow, damp, lined with pipes and cobwebs. Sarah followed, Rex leaping down effortlessly beside them. Their breaths echoed softly as they moved forward. After several yards, the tunnel widened into the basement of her house. The place was a mess. The walls were cracked, furniture overturned. Danner's men had been here, searching, but not thoroughly. In the corner, an old steel locker stood against the wall. Sarah hurried toward it, entering a short code on the digital pad. The lock beeped and clicked open. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was a folder of documents and a small waterproof case. Sarah's hand shook slightly as she lifted the case. "This is it," she said. "The manifests, the payment routes, everything." Ethan opened the folder. It contained copies of shipping records signed under false names. He recognized one. Lita M. Danner. Proof at last. "We need to move fast," he said. "Once they realize the fire didn't kill us, they'll check here next." Rex suddenly growled, low and guttural. His ears flattened. Ethan spun toward the stairwell. Footsteps, light but deliberate. Then a voice. "Well, well, I thought the rats might come home." Detective Voss stepped into the doorway, pistol raised, smirking. His face looked ghostly pale in the dim light, eyes glittering with cruel amusement. "You should have stayed dead, Officer Hunt." Sarah froze, fury and fear clashing in her gaze. Ethan raised his rifle, steady. "Put it down, Voss." The detective chuckled. "You really think you can win against us? The department belongs to Danner. The state belongs to him. You're just two ghosts whispering in a blizzard." Ethan moved slightly, aligning his aim. "Maybe. But ghosts can still haunt the living?" Before Voss could react, Rex lunged. The impact was sudden and violent. The dog's full weight knocking the gun aside. The weapon fired once, the bullet grazing Ethan's shoulder. The fight was brutal, close quarters. Voss tried to shove Rex away, punching at the dog's ribs, but Rex bit down on his arm, drawing blood. Ethan closed the distance and struck, slamming his elbow into Voss's jaw. The detective fell backward, hitting the concrete with a sickening thud. Sarah stood trembling, holding her flashlight over him. "He's still breathing," she said quietly. "Not for long if we stay here," Ethan replied. He tore a piece of Voss's coat, tying his hands behind his back. "He'll wake up soon. We need to go." They climbed out through the back window. the wind cutting across their faces like knives. Snow had started falling again, thick and fast. In the distance, sirens wailed faintly, not the sound of rescue, but pursuit. Ethan handed Sarah the waterproof case. "You get this to the FBI field office in Helena. Don't stop for anyone. I'll draw them away." Her eyes widened. "Ethan, no—" He cut her off with a quiet, firm look. "You said it yourself. They'll burn the state to find us. Better they burn the wrong direction." Rex pressed close to him, tail stiff, as if sensing what was coming. Ethan knelt, placing a hand on the dog's neck. "Stay with her, boy. That's an order." Rex whimpered, torn between loyalty and command. Sarah hesitated, tears freezing at the corner of her eyes, then turned and disappeared into the storm, clutching the evidence. Ethan watched until her shape vanished into white. Then he turned toward the distant sound of engines and cocked his rifle. The wind howled across the mountains like a warning, and Ethan stepped forward into it, a lone figure against the snow. The storm had turned the world into a blur of white and silence. The forest was a ghostly maze, trees bending under the weight of snow as if bowing to the night itself. Ethan Cole moved through it like a shadow, his rifle slung across his back, his breath sharp and shallow in the cold air. Behind him, the faint orange glow of distant headlights bled through the storm. Danner's men, closing in. Every step he took crunched softly against the frozen ground, every exhale a cloud fading into darkness. He was bleeding again from the shoulder wound reopened in the last fight, but pain no longer mattered. What mattered was time, buying enough of it for Sarah and Rex to reach Helena with the evidence. Miles away, Sarah Hunt fought the storm on her own. Her hair, once a fiery auburn, was now matted with frost beneath her hood. Her eyes, red from wind and exhaustion, burned with purpose. She clutched the waterproof case to her chest like it was her heartbeat. Rex trotted ahead, his paws leaving deep imprints in the snow. The dog's fur was caked with ice, his breath steaming in the frigid air, yet his movements remained sure and tireless. Every few steps he looked back at her, as if to remind her that they were still together, that they would make it. As dawn broke faintly over the ridge, the sound of engines grew louder. Ethan had led his pursuers into a narrow canyon flanked by sheer cliffs. The wind howled between the walls, drowning out everything but the faint hum of a helicopter above. He crouched behind a fallen log, reloading his last magazine. The snow around him was stained pink with his blood. His mind drifted briefly to the desert sun of his past deployments, the faces of comrades lost, the quiet nights when survival was the only prayer he knew. He had promised himself he'd never fight another man's war again, but this one was different. This one was his. Through the roar of the wind, he heard them coming. 5 men in tactical coats, led by Lieutenant Mark Danner himself, now stripped of all pretense of law. His uniform coat was gone, replaced by dark combat gear, but the arrogance remained. His hair was wet with snow, his face pale and drawn, yet his eyes gleamed with the feverish certainty of a man convinced he could not fall. "Cole!" Danner shouted into the wind, his voice echoing against the canyon walls. "You think this changes anything? She's probably dead by now. That evidence won't survive the storm." Ethan's lips curved into a grim smile. "Then you better pray I don't." He rose from cover and fired. The echo cracked like thunder. 2 of Danner's men dropped instantly, the others scattering behind the rocks. Danner ducked, firing back, bullets tearing through the snow. The firefight was chaotic. White smoke, metal flashes, and the smell of gunpowder mixing with frozen air. Ethan moved with practiced precision, each motion calculated, every second bought with his breath. But there were too many. Oh, bullet struck his side, spinning him backward against the icy ground. Pain bloomed like fire. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to his knees. Danner approached slowly, pistol in hand, expression calm, almost amused. "You should have walked away, soldier," he said. "You don't win wars by dying for someone else's crusade." Ethan's voice came rough and quiet. "You win by making sure the right one lives." Before Danner could respond, a sound rose above the wind, a low rumble, deepening quickly into the heavy thump of rotor blades. Both men looked up. A helicopter was approaching from the north, cutting through the clouds like a blade of light. Its markings were different. Not Danner's gray insignia, but the bold seal of FBI Tactical Command. Danner's smirk faltered. "No," he muttered. "No, it's not possible." Ethan exhaled relief, flickering behind his pain. "Guess the storm didn't kill everything." As the chopper descended, figures in dark blue gear rappelled from the side. Federal agents, their movements swift and precise. Gunfire erupted again. Danner's men panicked, returning fire. Ethan used the distraction, lunging forward despite the agony in his ribs. He slammed into Danner, the two men crashing into the snow. The pistol flew from Danner's hand, skidding across the ice. They fought in silence, fists and elbows, a struggle born not of duty, but of hatred and survival. Danner was strong, but desperation made Ethan stronger. He pinned the lieutenant down, gripping his collar. "You use the badge to bury people," he growled. "Now it's going to bury you." Danner spat blood, sneering. "You think they'll believe you? You're nobody." Ethan's voice was steady, cold. "Then I guess it's a good thing she's not." Before Danner could speak again, the sound of barking broke through the wind. Rex bounded into the canyon, snow spraying beneath his paws, followed by Sarah, limping but alive, her parka torn, her face raw from the cold, yet defiant. She had made it back. Sarah raised her gun, aiming straight at Danner. Her hands didn't tremble this time. "It's over," she said, her voice low but final. "The FBI has everything. You're finished." Danner's defiance cracked. His eyes darted to the helicopter above, now landing nearby. Agents spreading out with rifles raised. He tried to reach for his fallen weapon, but Rex lunged, pinning him to the snow, teeth bared an inch from his throat. The agents surrounded them, shouting commands. Within seconds, Danner was restrained, his face pressed into the ice, his hands cuffed. One of the agents, a tall man in his 40s with cropped blonde hair and a weathered face, approached Sarah. His name tag read Agent Ryan Hale, the FBI lead investigator. "You're Officer Hunt?" he asked, voice deep and even. "We've been tracking this ring for months. You just gave us everything we needed." Sarah nodded weakly. "It wasn't just me." She turned to Ethan, who now leaned against a rock, blood soaking his coat. Agent Hale crouched beside him, assessing the wound. "You're lucky, son. A few inches deeper, and we'd be talking to your ghost." Ethan managed a faint smile. "Wouldn't be the first time." Hours later, the storm broke. The mountains gleamed under the rising sun, their peaks catching the first light of dawn. Danner and his surviving men were loaded into armored vehicles, faces blank under heavy guard. The world that had been silent for so long finally breathed again. Sarah sat on the back ramp of the helicopter, a blanket draped over her shoulders, watching as medics worked on Ethan. His eyes fluttered open briefly, catching hers. "You made it," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "So did you," she replied, though her voice wavered. "You didn't have to come back for me." Ethan looked at her with a tired, almost peaceful expression. "Maybe I did." Rex nudged his hand, whining softly. Ethan smiled faintly, his fingers brushing the dog's fur. "Good boy," he murmured. The helicopter blades began to spin again, lifting them toward the horizon. Below, the scars of the storm faded into white, leaving only footprints that would soon disappear beneath new snow. But some marks, the kind burned into the soul, would never fade. And so, when the storm finally broke over Snowpine, it wasn't just the mountains that were washed clean. It was the hearts that refused to give up. Ethan, Sarah, and Rex had walked through fire, through betrayal, through nights so dark even faith felt like a whisper. Yet in the end, it wasn't their strength alone that carried them. It was grace. Because sometimes miracles don't come as thunder from heaven. Sometimes they come as a stranger who refuses to walk away, as a loyal dog who won't stop searching, as the quiet courage of someone who still believes truth is worth bleeding for. And maybe that's how God works in this world, not through the grand and impossible, but through the small mercies that keep us alive long enough to see the dawn again. So if this story touched your heart, take a moment to remember the people and creatures who stood by you in your own storms. Share this story so it might reach someone still trapped in their winter. Leave a comment below and tell us, where are you watching from tonight? And as always, may God bless you, protect your home, and guide you through every storm you face. If you believe that miracles still happen, say Amen in the comments. Share this video with someone who needs hope. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and second chances.